Comforted Man here, and I have Will Myers with me. Yes, Will Myers from Stranger Things. Noah Schnapp is his actual name. Thanks for coming here, Will. It's great to see you. So you're going to talk about... Oh, wait. No, I'm sorry. That's not... I'm wrong. You're not that guy. You're not that dude. You're... Is
that what you think I look like?
I was just saying, look, my brain said that this is what, you look like him. And so there you go.
No.
That's you. You're that guy.
When I got my hair cut, when I get my hair cut in lockdown, it did look a bit like that. To be fair.
Okay, that's my stupid thing. Now let's get serious. I told you, All right, so Physically Debunked / the Platonic Realm on YouTube, and I found you somehow, Kalam, I think it was cosmological argument stuff, whatever.
Yeah,
and right. So you were like, oh yeah, this is stupid and wrong. And I'm like, yeah, join the club. So you're just starting out. You're on YouTube. I think you've got like what 3-4 videos now or something like that.
Yeah, I started a long time ago. I think a year ago. I just made a couple of things and then abandoned it for a while. And now I think hopefully I can make a few more things in a row. Maybe try and grow it now that I've got a blog and a Twitter thing up and running more. So
yeah, I now, and also you are a PhD, working on a PhD. So what's that like?
Well, I haven't started yet. So I did apply. I did apply for PhDs last year, but I applied to some quite very competitive ones in kind of string theory, that kind of thing, and didn't quite realize how competitive they were. So I ended up this year PhD-less, and so I've been working the last year as a maths teacher in a secondary school, which has been very fun. But the long-term goal has always been to try and get into academia. So I have an offer. I've got an offer to do a PhD at a university in London beginning in September. And that's on early universe cosmology. So looking at things in the early universe, the seeds of structure, how they develop. So no, I haven't quite started yet, but it's soon, and I'm very, very excited about it.
That is incredibly amazing, because I didn't even know you had to apply for. I don't know anything about anything. I've been out of the school system for a while.
See, I never want to leave it. So,
well, yeah. Hey, man, if you can teach and you can do good educational stuff, like put your lectures on YouTube, like other people have done or whatever. I think that's great, because we really need that. We really need that.
No, I'd always love to do that. So this is public communication is such a key thing in science. So if I can get into that.
I mean, and you can start, simple, watered down, and then you can get more complex or whatever. Or you can just start complex. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Whatever. I watch things that I don't know. It's like I watch the, different math stuff. Like I've, every now and then watch number file. I'm like, well, they said words. Okay. They were talking about numbers. I don't know what the hell they said.
Do love number file. It's great stuff.
Yeah. So, okay, so you know about the universe. So how did the universe, let me ask this. Did the universe begin? You're our expert, so we're just going to believe whatever you tell us. Did the universe begin? Come on, answer the question.
The answer to this question, as with most profound questions in physics at the moment, is simply we have no idea. The only thing we can say is that our universe in its current state had a beginning. And that's the main story behind the Big Bang, really. Our universe hasn't always existed in the state we find it in today. 13.7 billion years ago, there was some event that changed what the universe was like and produced the universe we have today. Before that event, whether there's any meaningful description of what happens before that, we don't know. But I think a lot of cosmologists, a lot of theoretical cosmologists think that it would be strange if this was the only universe and if there was nothing else. So one of the areas that I'll be working on is inflation theory. Successful in a way. We don't really understand why inflation happens at all, but it's a good explanation of various previous problems in cosmology. So it's a successful theory in a way. And one of the things we don't understand about it is how it gets started and how it can stop. And what this means when we look at the universe as a whole is if inflation can start and stop whenever it likes, then we could be living in a multiverse full of these bubble universes which just suddenly inflate and form their own disconnected space-times. So with the physical models that we currently use to model the early universe, it would seem much more natural if this wasn't the only universe out there. And so whereas 13.7 billion years ago, we can say that's the beginning of our universe, it's not necessarily the beginning of reality. I'm not sure many physicists are certain that it would count as a beginning of all of reality. So the simple answer is we don't know, but my personal opinion would be that probably not. It seems unnatural if that were the case.
That's what I've pretty much heard and read, from most scientists. But the apologist, the theist, tends to say, "Aha, there's a beginning, therefore there's a cause." So let's talk a little bit, if you will, about cause and effect. Well, we could use the Clom as the example, I suppose. But the argument is essentially, well, we know that things have cause and effect, but I say, well, I don't know because quantum physics is a thing, and I don't understand it. And the guy that's an expert in it, said that if you did understand it, you don't. So, but I don't, I don't really know. It's like cause and effect. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the chicken did, but then before that was the lizard, and whatever. And so
lobster.
We're used to something coming after some other thing, but is that the case all the way back as we go backwards in time to where we hit, the early universe, as I said, the T1 point, the time 1 point, or whatever. I don't know the official name of that. You can clarify that if you want.
I mean, we virtually have no idea what it is. So the name we give it is just singularity. What singularity means is that's where all our laws of physics break down, which means we have no sensible way of talking about it. So singularity. Okay. That's what we say when there's something we don't know what to say about.
All right, singularity. I like T1 point because, I don't know. I just, whatever. It's what I've been saying. I don't want to change it now.
I mean, you can describe it however you like. Nobody knows anything about it. So
singularity is probably, you know what? I'll say singularity. I'll try to remember. I'll forget, but So cause and effect at some point we can't know. Like, yes, it works now, here and now, for sure. But now I see a problem of, well, we haven't observed the entire universe, so is it plausible that somewhere else cause and effect isn't taking place in this universe? Or is this a hard and fast rule? I mean, how would we... Is there a model for this? Is there any ideas about this?
So I think what makes the Kalam cosmological argument persuasive to some people is because it trades really on the vagueness of cause and effect. Cause and effect, everything that begins to exist has a cause. It seems very intuitive. It seems very plausible when you go through life. You think, well, of course that has to be the case. Every effect has a cause. And I think that's what makes the argument persuasive to some people. But if you want to actually analyze causation, both the philosophy of causation is extremely convoluted. And in physics, causation is a tricky subject still. I think so my personal viewpoint is to go along with the kind of what David Hume, how David Hume approached causation. So Scottish philosopher David Hume, great skeptic, but what he thought about causation was that he denied that it was this a priori notion that everyone knew about and that it was just a logical truth that everyone knew. Instead, he realized that actually there is no a priori notion of what cause and effect is. The only way we can get any idea of what cause and effect is by looking at the physical world and seeing how different events occur in conjunction with one another repeatedly. So my approach is to take this approach and say, well, the only way we could understand what cause and effect is as a relation is by looking at the world and looking at our ideas of physics and how it tells us how things behave and whether we can get a notion of causality out of that. If we look at the physics, causation is a tricky concept to define. Not everything seems to obviously obey cause and effect. So take, for example, radioactive isotopes. When you have a radioactive nucleus, it can decay, and there's a perfectly well-defined probabilistic law telling you what the probability that half the nuclei will decay in a specific amount of time. So there is a probabilistic law. This is a lawful process, but it's probabilistic. So there's nothing you can do that will definitely cause it to decay at a particular time. And I feel that this makes causation quite difficult to define when you start looking at quantum events like decay processes, because if there's nothing that can trigger exactly when this nucleus decays, then what's the cause? How there is nothing that causes it per se. It's random to an extent. It obeys a probability distribution, so you can say with what probability it will decay, and that it's more likely to decay in this amount of time than a smaller amount of time. But the actual event of the decay is it caused? There doesn't seem to be a very good. There's nothing I can think of that I could say, yeah, that's definitely the cause of it. Because in philosophy, you have something known as what's the sufficient cause. So a sufficient cause is a cause that happens, and if that cause happens, the effect must follow. And for radioactivity, there is no such thing as a sufficient cause, because there's nothing you can do to this atom that means it's definitely going to decay in the next second. So causation gets quite tricky when you're looking at quantum properties of matter and quantum behavior. But let's zoom out a bit and let's see if we can find a definition of causation that applies more every day. The best kind of idea of causation I think we have in physics is when we consider things like relativity. So when you have special relativity, you have the fact that nothing can travel faster than light, or no signal, no information can travel faster than light. So what you can say here is that you can split up your space-time into regions of causality. Everything that's within your light cone is what's causally linked to you. So your light cone is just how to explain it. So your light cone is just all the space and time that you could reach physically without. Oh yeah, there we go. So your light cone is just all the possible physical things that you could reach, and also all the physical things in the past that could have reached or could have interacted with you. So we split up our space-time into things that could affect you, and we say these are things that are causally linked to you, and we say that, and these are called time-like things. And then we also have regions of space which are called space-like, and these are things that could never interact with you, or you were never affected by. And so these things aren't causally linked to you. So in this way, we can kind of build up a picture of causation which relies on space-time. and relies on light cones and the specific structure of space-time. And in special relativity, that's Minkowski space-time with light cones at every point, and this defines in a way a causal structure. But if this is our only idea of what causation is in physics and from nature, then it relies on space-time. And causation, which I think you can get in an intuitive sense anyway, is a temporal event. Causation is between things located in time. And if causation is between things located in time, then it makes no sense to talk about what caused the existence of the universe. Because if the universe doesn't exist, then there's no time, because space-time, and so time is a part of the universe. So if the universe doesn't exist, you have no time, which means you don't have any defined notion of what causation is, because causation needs time to be defined. This is looking at it from very much a physicalist perspective. Of course, there's philosophy that tries to define causation atemporally, but personally, I don't find it particularly compelling, because I think causation is a relation that we've seen in the physical world, and to abstract it beyond that is not something I think is necessarily correct to do. But looking at it from a physical perspective, causation requires time. If the universe doesn't exist, you don't have time, so you can't have a well-defined notion of a cause for the universe.
Wow. Well, that was
I kept going there, didn't I?
Thank you for the very concise and short answer. Hey, look, I should be talking. When people ask me a question, I do the same thing where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to keep going until I'm done. But no, you
gotta make sure you get all your points out.
It's great because, this to me brings us to mind that, there was, I think I talked to you about, I don't know who I said this to at any rate, but there was a little bit of like a 2-minute clip of this flat earth nitwit talking about aviation. I think I did talk to you about this a little bit, but
you did,
yeah, I did. And so I have a friend that's a captain. He's a pilot. He's an instructor. He knows, he's been doing this stuff like since he was 8 or 10 or something crazy, so he knows the stuff. And like everything that was said in that 2 minutes was wrong in every possible way that it could be wrong. And not only wrong, but lies and complete incoherence. And so it took, whatever it was, almost an hour some odd, to explain all the right stuff. And what you said took a long time because it's real and it's complicated. Whereas the apologist, well, not to paint too broad of a brushstroke, but the one that's defending this argument, at least the Kalam, it's like, well, but this is what we, it looks like this is what's going on. It's like, yeah, well, but it's not, because of all this other stuff, and even when you said we could reduce it to a syllogism, and you even made it into sort of a syllogism. He's like, if causality is based on time and then you don't have time, then you don't have causality. There's a syllogism. It's valid and sound as far as I can. I'd have to reformat, maybe, tinker with it to make sure. But there's nothing about it that I can, whereas the other one, because of the language of it and everything else, there's all sorts of brokenness with it. And it's interesting how the philosophical logic, if you will, intertwines with science. And I've said this in other videos and stuff I've done, that I think that logic is not. It's a tool, but it's not as great of a tool as science. Because you, at the end of the day, I could say, well, either my light is on or it's off. It's lobsters exist, so it's not off. And it's like, what? It's nothing. It's like that. It's completely disjointed. It's like, well, yeah, it's not off, it's on. But it's like the conclusion might be true, but because the argument's broken, you can't,
I studied at university I studied physics and philosophy, so I've always been interested in both. So I love both, but certainly at times when I've read philosophy and some of the pure logical arguments, I just feel that sometimes they're so disconnected from how our physical picture of what the universe is and our actual physical understanding of how things work, that it makes me somewhat skeptical as to how applicable the results and the logic is.
Yeah, you have to.
I've always taken a much more of a physicist approach to philosophy, in that I think philosophy is very useful, but I think it always has to be tied or has to be based off what we know about what we've learned about the physical world. Because at the end of the day, we can't trust our intuition. Quantum mechanics has shown us that in abundance. Most of physics has shown us that as we got more and more developed. Our intuition is basically rubbish once you move past Newtonian physics. It doesn't give us any idea of what the world is actually like.
Right. And that's what I was trying to kind of get at, is that you have to check in with reality. So, that's how you identify the logical fallacies in the first place, is you scrutinize the premise from every conceivable angle that you can. And then you're able to, because you look at reality and look at what's known, look at what's unknown, and then you can extrapolate from that what fallacy, if any, that particular premise has made. And
because I think a lot of the time in Kalam they try to pass off that first premise that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Right.
They try and pass that off as a purely necessary logical statement.
Right.
But I don't think there's any way that you can understand causation without at least having abstracted it from the physical world first. In which case, that premise relies totally on what we've observed in the physical world, and so it's prone to be attacked by what we know about.
Well, of course, there's other structural problems in that it's a universal claim, and universal claims have to be demonstrably demonstratable to be true. So the classic "all men are mortal." Well, nobody in their right mind, at any rate, would argue against this. Humans are mortal. We don't have any example of an immortal being. Although, of course, now you could say, well, if Jesus existed, then I guess all humans aren't mortal. It's like, well, is Jesus human? Yes. Is he a god? Yes. Okay. Yeah. What? And so now and Lazarus, and probably other Hercules, or whatever else you want to throw in there. So, but we're going to ignore the mythology, and we're just going to say, well, look, all men are mortal. Okay, just let's agree. And it's demonstrably demonstratable. Whereas, it's like,
all things has a cause is it's difficult to demonstrate.
Right, exactly.
For everything.
Right, everything. You're not talking about.
And also, everything that we've ever observed to obey cause and effect are things that exist within the universe.
Right.
So to then say that this premise then applies to the fact of the existence of the entire universe, you don't really have a good reason that will apply to the entire universe.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's multiple objections, and I suppose you come at it a little bit different way than I do, because you understand more about the science, which is great, because these are more ways that this is wrong.
there are lots of ways, and I think there's lots of ways at analyzing why it's faulty, simply because I think the premise itself trades on a vague notion of what causality is.
Right.
And I know that I only recently saw a video by Cosmic Skeptic and his personal take on it, which I hadn't thought of before and hadn't encountered before, was more to do with composition, and that nothing that we know of, or if we look at it at fundamental constituents and stuff, nothing we know of ever began to exist. So you can doubt the first premise. Which I'm not sure. I think I kind of agree with Craig, actually, that I think that's mereologically quite quite extreme.
Yeah,
but that's no reason to deny it. I think it's certainly a valid viewpoint, and it's an interesting one that I hadn't come across before.
I would agree. I think I said it in my KCA video that there's compositional fallacy on top of the other fallacies and formal fallacies, as well as informal fallacies, as well as ignoring science and okay, so we had a question I wanted to get to before I forgot. So what exactly is a beginning? Now this is kind of, I think that like in science we want precision of language, I would say.
Oh yeah,
and so in that vein, like pebble, there's a certain definition of what a pebble is, right? So does this word beginning have the same sort of hard edge to it? Or is this kind of one of those natural language problems that doesn't really have a hard and fast rule to it?
Hey, it's a very good question, actually. What a beginning would actually mean exactly in physics? It's a really difficult one. Let's start with something simpler. Say the beginning of a particular molecule or the beginning of a particular physical thing within the universe. I guess you could say that the beginning of that would just be the particular time coordinate at which the event of its creation happens. Not a particularly enlightening definition at that level, but the interesting thing about that is, given relativity, that time at which something began won't be the same for all observers. There's no notion of simultaneity when you consider special relativity. Different observers will disagree over what occurred at the same time. So when, say, a particle is created out of the vacuum or a molecule forms, different observers will disagree over what time that beginning was. So there's already subtleties to what or complications as to what a beginning would be for anything in the universe. But I think actually you could call it a beginning still, because so long as you just took one observer, this observer, all the time coordinates and all the time labels that he assigns to things will be consistent, and so he will have a consistent definition of what the beginning of that molecule or that particle was. So I think you can do it in that case. Now let's look at, say, the beginning of the whole universe. Well, this is where there's just tons and tons of trouble, because I suppose you could define, if there was a first moment of space-time, a time coordinate at which everyone's world line ended, all world lines came back to it and ended there, then you might be able to call that a beginning. And in a way, that's kind of what the Big Bang is. And that's what the BGV theorem says for our universe, that's commonly quoted, all on it in a universe which is on average expanding. The world lines, there's a physical boundary that you reach in the past.
Okay, pause. Yep. I wanted you to clarify, what was that theorem you said? BG what?
So the BGV, so it's the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, is often quoted by apologists as proving that the universe had a beginning. And what it says is that for a universe that is on average expanding, it must have a past space-time boundary. And so people interpret this as being a beginning. And this does apply to our universe. Our universe is on average expanding, and if you trace it back, there's a point at which there's a space-time boundary at which things no longer make sense in a way. And so this does apply to the universe, but what it says is not that the universe has a beginning, but that we can only trace back our history in classical space-time so far. Once all these world lines converge, then we get higher densities, higher energies, and we end up with singularity, which is just a technical term for a place where we don't understand what happens anymore. Our physical laws break down. So what you can say about what we currently understand of the universe is that at some point in its past, it must have a singularity where our laws of physics break down. That's true. What happens beyond that singularity, we have no idea. And to have an idea of what a beginning is, I wouldn't want to. A beginning's probably an emergent concept from what the quantum nature of space-time would be. So basically, what the BG theorem assumes is that space-time is classical. And it says, so long as space-time is classical, we get back to a past space-time boundary. Yep, this is true for our universe. We trace things back, we get back to a singularity, and at that point, our classical space-time breaks down. We can no longer use it. It no longer applies. And to get further than this singularity and understand what happened closer to the Big Bang, we need a quantum theory of gravity and a quantum theory of how space-time behaves. And whether there's any good definition of what a beginning is in quantum space-time, who knows? Because we have no idea what a quantum space-time is like. We have no idea what quantum gravity is actually like. So who knows?
Yeah, it's complicated.
It's very complicated. But in classical space-time, you could conceivably call a beginning just the first temporal coordinate in space-time. This isn't something that would be inconsistent. You could have this, but because classical space-time arises out of quantum space-time, you can say that this idea of a beginning is actually an emergent idea and not necessarily something that's actually fundamental.
Right.
So whether there's a beginning or not, or whether there's a scientific definition of what a beginning is, it's really unclear.
So
I think in that ramble, I definitely.
I think there's an answer in there somewhere. I think I think it's like with what's called natural language, where we have a lot of these words and terms that's vague. Of course, you have the heap of sand paradox. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
yes.
Okay, you are. Okay, so I don't have to go. Now I want to make sure did you say BGV or okay.
That BGV for Borg-Guth-Vilenken.
Borg-Guth-Vilenken. Okay, great. We have several people really want to hammer you with the questions. This is great. Usually I save them for the end, but I think it's good to have them. So here's Mugger Fugger saying that Stephen Hawking had a theory called model-dependent realism that argued events are real as they're useful within their models, and then continues with Newtonian mechanics is real on larger scales, despite awareness of what occurs at quantum level. Andy, and what are your thoughts on this model-dependent realism? Oh, this won't take an hour to explain.
Oh God, no. Actually, this won't take very long to explain. Mostly because I'm not that familiar with.
I don't know what you're talking about either.
I did briefly come across it in my philosophy course, but sadly, I didn't spend as much time on it as I wish I shared that. It's definitely something I want to investigate.
So that'll be your next video.
It'll be a long time. I think it'll be a long time before I understand it properly. But just to say a few words on it. So Stephen Hawking is an interesting one in that he's definitely quoted at times as saying that philosophy is basically useless compared to science.
I kind of get what he's getting. Like
to some extent, I agree with him in that I think sometimes considerations of like what forms an object, what makes an object, and things like that. I think these are maybe interesting questions, and the logic behind was quite interesting, but I don't think they're physically that meaningful for our understanding of the actual world. Whereas philosophy of science and philosophy of physics, so that was one of the components of my course. I did philosophy of quantum mechanics and philosophy of special relativity. Absolutely fascinating, and it kind of takes the physics and the results that we know, and it asks really deep and further questions about, well, what does this actually mean for how the world behaves? And it's really, really interesting, and I think actually relevant to how we view the world. So, for example, philosophy of quantum mechanics. I've been reading a lot recently about many worlds theory and trying to understand the philosophy behind that. And this kind of philosophy is almost indistinguishable from physics. It's firmly grounded in physics and is asking really important questions about what the formalism means, and how we can possibly interpret it. It's really interesting and I think really worthwhile. So philosophy in that sense, philosophy of physics, philosophy of science, any philosophy that's based off our understanding of the world, I think is really excellent and really interesting and really relevant. Other philosophy, I think, at times becomes so abstract that it doesn't seem as meaningful anymore. But model-dependent realism, I've basically gone on a complete tangent away from this.
No, yeah. That's right.
I don't.
You don't know because you haven't studied it yet.
What was the example again? That what was the example about Newtonian?
Let's see, where is it?
Real
on. I don't know why you put that in.
Okay. Actually, no. So yeah, this is correct. If you leave, could you leave that up?
Yeah. Sorry. No, you read it. Goodbye.
No. Yeah. So there's kind of a difference between. Well, there's a big difference between what's fundamental and what's emergent. And you can say for something like Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian mechanics is emergent from quantum mechanics. You can show from quantum mechanics that you can reproduce Newtonian results, and that our understandings of what mass and position and anything like that, they can be understood as emerging from quantum mechanics. And so one of the things that's actually very relevant to discussions on many worlds theory is the idea of decoherence. And decoherence is basically governs how a purely quantum system can, in a way, lose its quantum behavior and behave like a classical system. So, Newtonian mechanics is real on large scales despite our awareness of what occurs in quantum level. So, yeah, on the quantum level, a purely quantum system behaves very weirdly. But when we consider big collections of quantum systems and how they interact, how they behave, we find that we can extract or we can read off classical equations from them. They behave semi-classically. And so in a way, this tells us that our Newtonian physics is a decent approximation to the actual quantum world. So Newtonian mechanics is real. Newtonian mechanics is real in a sense. It's just emergent in the same way that I think the example in one of the books I read is like tigers are real. I mean, tigers don't form the fundamental ontology of the world. As far as we know, electrons and quarks do. That's all that's fundamentally real. A tiger's not in this set of real things, but you wouldn't say that a tiger isn't real. A tiger is an emergent thing. It's an emergent concept. Now, when you're dealing with emergent concepts, they're not necessarily always mathematically well defined. And certainly for something like a tiger, it'd be very difficult to actually define mathematically what a tiger is. I think the difference between something like the fundamental things and emergent things is that fundamental things are supposed to be easier to describe mathematically, whereas emergent things aren't necessarily mathematically consistent. But in the middle, you kind of have these theories like Newtonian mechanics and thermodynamics in a way where you don't treat everything as being, or you treat a different set of things as being fundamental, things like mass, things like temperature. You treat these things as fundamental in your description, even though actually they're emergent from quantum properties. So temperature is just is just to do with the average kinetic energy of molecules that you have. So temperature isn't a fundamental concept in a way. It arises from properties of particles. But in thermodynamics, we treat it in a way as a fundamental thing, and we build up statistical dynamics and thermodynamics, which makes sense and allows us to describe big systems.
Oh,
I'm not I'm not sure how much I said about modal model in realism.
That's all right. We're gonna move on to the next question. That's gonna require 5 seconds to explain. I'm gonna keep teasing you, but it's okay. So yeah, let's talk about fine tuning. This should be yeah. Okay, now this is something that I don't. When the apologist says fine tuning, I know that they're not saying the same thing that scientists are saying when they say fine tuning. It's like, no. You have no idea what this is, and you're using this word wrong. But because I'm not scientifically very, literate, I can't explain it better than I can. So I will rely on my expert, which is you, to summarize all of the problems of fine tuning and what it is. Yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Right, let's do. I mean, I should have been expecting this.
You got a thanks for your answer. That's good. Okay, back to yeah. Who cares about that? I want to go. Let's go. Come on, we got to solve all the things about reality in this hour. Come on. Okay, so fine tuning. So what is fine? I think we should start with, rather than your explanation for fine tuning, we have to, I think, start with what is fine tuning.
So huge question, and thankfully, actually, I've been quite interested in it recently, and I've been reading some of the key texts on it. So actually, this is something that I have been more currently researching. Fine tuning. It's basically the observation that certain properties or certain constants, certain things about the universe in which we live in, the masses of the particles, properties like that, the strength of the different forces. Fine tuning is basically the realization that if these were any different, it seems very unlikely that life as we know it could exist. That's basically what the fine tuning is. If you change some of these constants, if you change masses of particles, if you change which particles are there, you get there have been proper studies done to look into what the consequences of changing these things are, and what we find is that only a very small parameter space actually allows for things like the creations of stars, which are, I think, difficult to argue that they're not necessary for the existence of life. So that's what fine tuning is. If we change various properties by a very, very, very tiny amount, life as we know it in the universe becomes inconceivable. So yeah, that's what fine tuning is. What do you want me to address next?
Oh yeah, that was simple. Yeah, look. I mean, that was great. That was concise, and I actually understood it this time. Okay, look at that. Okay, so we got to discuss this because here's a web page. It's a thing that somebody said on the internet that's wrong. Now, this is I love how it starts. I'll see if I can make it bigger a little bit. No, I can't. Okay, all right, whatever. It's stuck that way. Okay, I'll just read it. Truth number 2. Okay, we're already starting off great. This is just true. I don't. It doesn't look. Let's. It doesn't matter. Well, I don't know. Let's. Now I'm curious. What's truth number 1? Start here. Let's see. Oh God. Oh geez. Blah 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 blah. I don't care. Oh, this is. Oh. Yeah, okay, start here. Blah. Okay, no, it's something about being Christian. Whatever, I don't know. Don't care. Okay, anyways, truth number 2. The fine-tuned universe supports the existence of God. Yeah. And then here's a not-to-scale representation of the solar system. Because I think if everything was that close together, we'd be fucked. But, just spinballing here. Also, pretty sure that's not the scale either. I think Jupiter would be bigger. Earth is pretty big in that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, truth number 2: the fine-tuned universe supports the existence of God. Which God? Oh well, Christian Judeo God, of course. So this is the most powerful argument for the existence of God. why is there something rather than nothing? And the complexity of the universe, the existence of life, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, if things were different, things would be different, and then we wouldn't have life. And because we have life, that means God. The end. Checkmate. Refute that. Okay, go.
Well, I'll start off by having read more and more. So, big question. Go away. Let me talk. So I tend to agree actually that I think this, if there is any evidence for God, I think this is one that is very easy to interpret as being evidence for him. I think it's definitely the best. I think it is definitely the best argument that has ever been proposed. Even really? So,
wow.
Yeah, I have to.
All right, you're off my show now.
I haven't got to talk.
You haven't got to it. I know.
I haven't proved it yet.
Look, I got to throw you under the bus. Come on.
I think it is the best argument because if you do change this variety, anything about these variety of parameters by even a really tiny amount, life as we know it, and I think in a lot of cases all life just doesn't seem like it can exist. And I think that fact is very profound and should definitely be suggesting that there's something about physics that we haven't discovered yet. Now, I don't think that's a God, because and here's why. So for a start, there are plenty of, I think, natural explanations that you could go to first. So things like a multiverse, things like eternal inflation, things where there are lots of universes. If there are lots of planets, we know that the probability that life's going to appear on one of them becomes expected. If there are lots of universes, then eventually we'd expect that there's a universe like ours which has the correct conditions for life. So I think that fine-tuning is a very powerful thing to consider, and that it probably does have profound consequences for what might be out there beyond our universe. But I think first off, there's probably if fine-tuning is a thing, then there's probably a natural way of explaining it. But that's assuming that fine-tuning is actually a thing. So when we say that if we vary some of the constants or vary some of the field strengths, well, we don't actually have a right to change them. What makes us think that we can change their values? There's no evidence to suggest that these values can actually change at all. So things like, let's consider the speed of light, Planck's constant, the gravitational constant. As a physicist, you can work in what are called natural units, where these constants all become one. They don't have a specific exact value. They just disappear from our theories. In a way, these constants are not physically meaningful at all. All they are just conversion coefficients that allow us to change between the natural units of the universe and our everyday units of measurement like meters, seconds, and things like that. So there are some constants which it's not clear that they even exist in a way, let alone that they're fine-tuned. But now let's consider other things like masses, things like the relative strength of the forces. These things take on quite very different numbers, and it's very difficult in physics to explain why they're the value they are. Doesn't mean that they could have been any other value. We don't know that. We simply don't know if this is the only value that they could have been. And one of the speculative theories of physics, so supersymmetry, one of the things that it tries to do is to try and find mathematically derive the relative values of the strengths of the forces from supersymmetric theories. Okay, so what it's trying to do is it's trying to work out whether these constants are actually interconnected, so they're not independent. If they're independent, then we have lots of independent quantities that all looked fine-tuned, and that does suggest fine-tuning. But we don't know that they're actually independent, and we don't know that we can change them. And what supersymmetry suggests is that certainly for some of them, we can find precise mathematical relationships which says why they're the value they are. But this is very hypothetical. This is very theoretical physics.
Right.
So take it with a pinch of salt. But what it could very easily suggest is that these quantities aren't actually fine-tuned at all. They are exactly the only value that they ever could have been.
So am I correct in that explanation? It'd be something like, if they were different, that the universe wouldn't even be possible. Like, this is the only kind of universe.
The other way around is in that sense. It may well turn out that this is the only universe possible.
Right.
Now, I think personally, from what I've read, I think it's unlikely that our universe is the only one possible. I think that's very unlikely. I favor much more the existence of a kind of multiverse where lots of different what are called symmetry breaking processes happen, and these determine lots of different values of field strengths and strengths of forces and constants and things like that. That's what I prefer personally. But I think the bottom line is that I think we've got this set of constants and things that look fine-tuned, and I agree that they look fine-tuned, but we don't know really that they are. Fine-tuning is a powerful thing for telling us that we've got more physics to find. It's not in any way at the moment, I think. It certainly doesn't prove that God exists. And I don't think at the moment it suggests that God exists moreover than it suggests that there are more universes.
Yeah, well, I'd also think it's a problem of the, not applying the weak anthropic principles. Like, well, yeah, if we did tinker with this, as you said, life as we know it, and there's the key to me is, well, what the bleep is life? And that's a whole nother thing, Oh man, that's at least another, 5 minutes. Of course. So what? And somebody had asked me that during a somewhat debate discussion that I'd had, was like, well, if the Planck length was whatever, and then everything would be these particles, and is that life? And I'm like, I don't know. It could be. Like, maybe in that universe where all that exists is, Planck's, whatever the bleep that is, maybe they could have formed in patterns that would, be as, be a different idea of, what the bleep is life, I don't, so the thing is, and I don't know, maybe you said that there have been models that have tried to do this. I don't know if
I agree and disagree. I think I agree with you in the sense that I think it's important to consider that we don't actually really have a great definition of what life actually is, and so
our kind of life, certainly, yeah.
We don't even have a definition of what our kind of life is, that it's carbon-based, let alone what life is in general. So we already don't have a great definition of that. So it could certainly be that there's multiple universes where some form of life does occur. But I think that even if this were the case, there's such a narrow range of parameters that produces carbon at all in the universe and things like that, or produces stars at all. I think that fine-tuning is real in that these parameters don't look arbitrary. So I think fine-tuning is real in that sense. What I disagree with apologists is that it suggests there's a God. I think the next logical step is, well, this is more pointing to that we don't have a fundamental theory of physics yet, and that maybe there are other universes with different constants. I think that's a much more elegant and much more plausible explanation for why this is the case.
I think that there's this added thing of, because that the life part is somehow connected to the fine tuning, that because that this is what's important. That obviously, if there wasn't life, then we wouldn't be here to talk about it. But I'm like, well, that's the point. Of course, we're in a universe where life can happen. But I could imagine a universe just like this where life didn't happen. It could be the exact same universe and life just doesn't happen for, even though the conditions are perfectly right, just, it just didn't pan out, if you will, or whatever. And I don't know how that leads to, I mean, I guess you'd say, well, it's a God because it's something that's, and then you're saying, well, what? God is a thing that can tinker with these tuning. Well, then what's God's tuning? How, you've just moved the problem back.
I think what's most unbelievable about God being an explanation is that fine, if our universe does, the constants in our universe do look like they've been selected precisely in a way, but why select them precisely at all? It just seems so strange to me that why would God have chosen these particular laws of physics which produce life in such a small in such a small range, in such a small part? It just doesn't look like this universe is designed for life, really, in a global sense, in that an omnipotent God chose to do this particular universe. Certainly the constants look fine-tuned for our existence. I agree with that, but God can choose whatever laws of physics and whatever he likes. Why these ones that give such a narrow range of possibilities for life?
Yeah, it could have been hypothetically.
I think appealing to God makes more questions than are able to be answered.
Yeah, I mean, and also I still maintain, and I guess I don't know if we're disagreeing on this or not, that yes, life is. I would say life is tuned for the universe, not the other way around. Is that? Are you disagreeing with that, or we just miscommunicating?
Life is tuned for the universe in a way. I agree with that, but I think if you change some of the parameters by just a tiny amount, the effects are so drastic for our existence that no life at all could have ever tuned itself to live in that environment. So, for example, changing the gravitational field strength slightly or things like that, the universe just becomes a sea of black holes, and that's it. Straight from the Big Bang, you just have a sea of black holes and nothing else. And we don't know what life is, but I don't think there's any life that could have fine-tuned to void and black hole.
Well, yeah, I don't know, but
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's the problem. Is it kind of runs into. But we don't, it's like I want is there like computer simulations of just this universe, let alone any others? Because it's like, okay, from what we know to now, has there been, I'd imagine like some supercomputer that ran it and said, okay, now that we did it once with our universe and we did it again and every time it works, let's tweak the degree of gravity and then see what happens. Or do you know of anything like that? Or
I mean there is theoretical work on things where they do just tweak the parameters and see what happens for the universe, what happens for things like star formation, galaxy formation, what happens for element formation where you can get carbon.
Is that pen and paper, or is that like computer models? Or
I presume computer models are probably involved at some point. Most theoretical physics work relies heavily on computer models. Cool. No, I think it's inescapable that the parameters for the constants and things do look as if they're fine-tuned. I think that's inescapable. But I disagree that it suggests the existence of a God. I think it might not be fine-tuned at all. Supersymmetry and string theory might mean that there aren't actually any parameters that are independent of one another that need selecting values for. That could be the case. I think that's more unlikely. What I think is more likely is just that there are lots of universes out there with different values for these things, and obviously we found ourselves in the only one or one of the only ones that could support us.
Right. I think it'd be much more interesting and much better of an argument for at least a powerful God that for whatever reason, doesn't want to just say hi to all of us, but one that wants to remain invisible, that we would find ourselves in a universe that couldn't support life. That would be like, what? That would be something amazing. It's like, of course we're in a universe that can support life. Duh. It's like, well, here we are. We found ourselves in a universe that can't support life, possibly, yet we're here. What the bleep? Must be a god, I guess. Yeah, okay. Maybe God could just say hi in that universe. Okay, so Jesse wanted a little bit more with the multiverse, that the constants can't change, but they can if it's a multiverse. He didn't really understand that. Okay, so let me see if I've got it, because I'm dumb. So if I've got it, anyone else can get it, maybe. That for this universe, at any rate, we know that the constants are X, Y, and Z, and that if those were changed, then things would be vastly different, and maybe life, at least as we understand life to be, wouldn't be. But so that's for this universe. So in a different universe, then there isn't. These constants are different, and there's no life there, and all the universe 1, 2, 3, and however many all don't have life, and we're universe number whatever that has life. Is that yeah?
I think for the specific question of why the constants don't change in our universe but can change in the multiverse, it's quite a thing in theoretical physics. So I've name dropped it before, symmetry breaking. So kind of what we're hypothesizing about what our reality actually is that there's some big symmetry group, is what it's called, a group of symmetries in nature, that is basically, and that's what our physical laws are fundamentally. They're just a symmetry group. They're just a set of symmetries. Now, our specific world exists in what's called a broken symmetry. This high symmetry, this perfectly symmetric theory only occurs at very, very, very high energies, like close to the Big Bang. So in our current universe, where we're at a much lower energy, this symmetry has been broken. And so all the forces that we see today, we hope that at higher energies they combine into one super force. But at the moment, they're broken down into separate things. And for each force, you have a different coupling constant, which determines how strong they are relative to one another. Now, these coupling constants, they're a product of how the symmetry is broken. So in our current universe, we're at one energy level, and we're not really changing at all from it. And in this energy level, the constants appear constant. Now, if you went to another universe, or you were right at the beginning of the universe and saw the energy decrease, what you'd see is symmetry getting broken. And when this symmetry gets broken, different values or different relative strengths can get selected. So it's quite a high level thing in theoretical physics, this idea of what determines how these constants could be different in other universes. That's one particular way that in other universes the fundamental overall symmetry of the world is broken down in a different way. What's called they're in a different vacuum state to what we're in. But there are other ways, I think, which I haven't read extensively about. So there's one particular theory. So Lee Smolin is a physicist, and one of the things he quite likes is he sees black holes as being containing their own universes. And so every time a black hole's formed and you go through the singularity, I'm not exactly sure what the mechanism is, but the laws and the constants change, and in this new universe inside the black hole, it has different laws of nature, different constants, things like that. I think at the moment, I think symmetry breaking is the one that's most known to me. But ultimately, because we don't know where the constants of nature, where they actually come from, it's difficult to say how they could change. There's lots of proposed models, and there's nothing inconsistent about it. yeah, there's lots of good models of other universes with different constants and how you can generate these different constants. But we don't understand our physics well enough yet to say that they can change or exactly how they change. I hope that helps.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Okay, I want to try to visualize the multiverse, if I may. I did this in MS Paint real quick, so it's very sophisticated. So I have here on the top left, I have universe, and it's like they're all these little bubbles because that's just, I don't know why, that's just what I think it would be. Now, and then that's one way to picture it. Then I have a different way where it's like universe in the, and then there's this multiverse. But then if that's a thing, then there's a multiverse where there's many multiverses. So which one is right?
If I knew that, I could probably get a Nobel Prize.
Yeah. Okay.
To be honest, no idea. There's loads of different models proposed. There's eternal inflation, where essentially we are just in one big space-time, and regions of that space-time bubble out and become essentially causally disconnected from each other. In that sense, we're all universes are located in the same space, but we're just in disconnected regions of it because we can't get out of them because they're expanding faster than the speed of light. So that's what's called a bubble universe. Whether you have, but maybe you can have universes that aren't located in a space around each other. There could just be no space between them. They could just exist perfectly independently of one another. For example, if you just imagine these two pictures on the screen here, if you just imagine, they're not necessarily connected by any space. They're just there, and they're just a region of space-time that exists independently of anything else. So that's a possibility. There's Lee Smolin's idea of things that generate through black holes, kind of a bit like eternal inflation, that everything is eventually located in some space-time, or an infinite number of them. But there's even more esoteric things. In string theory, you have brain worlds and universes of brains and all sorts.
Boltzmann Brains.
Oh, Boltzmann Brains. So Boltzmann Brains. It's not really a theory. It's more of something we need to avoid. So what a Boltzmann brain is, so why they were thought up.
I'm having too much fun with that. Sorry.
Why getting distracted?
Yeah, sorry.
Why Boltzmann brains were important is because when we were considering thermodynamics, we're trying to work out why our universe has such a low initial entropy. And so what the Boltzmann brains were invented to kind of demonstrate was that it's much more likely, thermodynamic-wise, that you are just a brain that's popped into existence rather than a whole universe with low entropy popping into existence.
Oh, no. So we are brains in a vat.
And so that it's worse, you don't even have the vat.
Oh, no.
So why the universe has such low entropy at the start is a problem. And Boltzmann brains kind of exaggerate that problem, because if you're saying that the universe is just a fluctuation, a huge entropy fluctuation that's just randomly occurred, and huge entropy fluctuations will randomly occur with some probability, so we can expect that to happen at some point. The problem is that your entire brain is a much smaller system and much higher entropy. So it's much more likely that your brain just formed in an empty universe, rather than the whole universe formed and eventually produced your brain. So that's what Boltzmann brains are. They're kind of to exaggerate or to show or to highlight what the problem is with assuming that our universe is just an entropy fluctuation. So Boltzmann brains are definitely a thing. They're not a theory. We don't want Boltzmann brains, but when we're considering models of the universe and models of cosmology, it's important that we kind of if we take the Boltzmann brains into account. Because if we have more Boltzmann brains than we do natural observers like us, then we've got a problem of, well, it's much more likely that you would have been a Boltzmann brain and not a human being on Earth after a Big Bang. So we've got a problem, essentially. But at the end of it, the Boltzmann brain problem essentially comes down to explaining why the universe has such low entropy at the start, and we're getting back into problems of how does nature behave at a singularity. Maybe there is a good explanation for why the universe has low entropy at its very beginning, but we don't know what that explanation is yet.
Okay. I read you the universe. It was really easy. Now I don't know there. I've always wondered if we're going to picture the universe in this way, which is probably a bad way to do it, but whatever. What is this called? Is there a name for the here's the universe, this is where we exist. What's this? What's out here? What is all this? Is there a name for that?
I mean, it might just literally not. You might just literally be failing to refer. That might not be anything at all. You can draw that perfectly well in paint.
I drew the look. I put it there. Give it a name.
Just because you can draw it in paint does not mean that it's fundamentally.
Oh, all right, fine. Okay.
But I mean,
it needs a name. I say we name it Physically Debunked. There we go. It could be the case that our universe is one embedded in a larger space. That could perfectly well be the case. All the space that isn't the universe.
You have space and you have a universe as well as we understand that.
Answer the question.
Well, I didn't come across it before, but a kind of theory, if you like, very hypothetical, that's really influenced my thinking and I found really interesting is Max Tegmark. So he's a physicist over in America, and his idea is that at the root of it, everything in existence is just a mathematical structure. So all that exists are mathematical structures, and every mathematical structure exists. And so our universe is just a particular mathematical structure, which is why we can describe it using mathematics, and why physical laws are portrayed mathematically. And in his picture, you have different levels of multiverse. So you have, at the base of it all, you have the mathematical multiverse, which is just the set of all mathematical systems. And then you have other things. You have like the quantum multiverse. You have the internal inflation multiverse, which I mentioned, a few times. And it provides quite a. I mean, there's no evidence at all for what he's saying in a way, but it's a way of organizing our thoughts about what the world could be in a way that you think, hey, maybe it could be that. So that's influenced my thinking a lot, and it has at least given a possible way to think about how some things might be connected and what everything could be.
Yeah. Well, we've hit an hour. So before our brains start to melt, I'm sure that we could go. I mean, this is for me fascinating. There's just more. I'm like, I've got so many more millions of questions that you may or may not have the answer to. And I think this is what I think, in kind of a sort of way to wrap up, and then maybe you give your thoughts on it, is that the God hypothesis, if you will, or theory, or whatever you want to call it, is here there be dragons. We don't know, therefore we're going to put God there until we can figure it out. And I'm comfortable and satisfied with the mystery. But of course, then, if multiverse is true, well, then maybe one of them has a God in it, but that God would be constrained probably to that universe, unless one of the universes has a God that's not. And then what? But it's so
difficult.
Yeah, you get to the point where it's like, yeah, and then sure, and in one of those universes, I'm God, and since I'm God and I can also break all the rules, I'll come and see me right now and say hi. It didn't happen, so okay.
Or shame.
Right.
Maybe it's just you. Maybe it's just you who's not a god in
yeah, maybe it's just not right. That would that would be just my luck. Yeah, I was gonna say that if everything is math, that's why there's so many problems. Okay, anyways. So what do you think, kind of to summarize, if you will, of the God hypothesis in short, or is that another video that we need to make?
I mean, it could easily be. It could easily be another video, but I think my main thoughts are just that the universe and the way it behaves. But to understand how the universe behaves, we've got to look at it, and it's behaved in ways that just do not conform to our intuition and don't behave how we expect them to, and behave in such fascinating and interesting ways. And I think that the God hypothesis is always put in to kind of explain these things, and yet it doesn't really explain why they're there. I think that we should take the world at face value. I don't think modern physics, the one thing that modern physics is pointing to, I think, is that the values of the constants in the universe, we need explanations for them, but we knew that anyway. And I think that there's more to the universe, and probably a multiverse out there, and that's fascinating, and who knows what else could be out there. But let's just take the physics where it leads us, and I think at this point the existence of a god is less likely than the existence of a multiverse, and it doesn't really add much to our understanding of how the physical universe works.
Okay, that's some profound thoughts you've given us. Thank you so much for your time and energy.
I've really enjoyed it.
Next time we will, of course, uncover the true nature of reality. So stay tuned for that. Be sure to subscribe to the Platonic Realm, Physically Debunked. His link is in the description because he keeps using his name.
I should be releasing a video soon on the BGB theorem specifically. So
okay, hey, yeah,
so yeah, please do.
Great, that sounds. I'm definitely gonna watch it, and I'm gonna leave stupid comments because I don't understand. I'll be like, oh, that was I don't know what you said.
They're always good.
And you have a lot of people that are already asking you pesky questions, so I'm sure those people know.
No, that was really fun. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, they will come to you, and I will send them all to you from now on. I'll just send everybody. I'll send the guy that thought God was zero your way. Yeah, I've got all sorts of people now. Oh yeah, you're gonna get all of the crazy. Well, most of my viewers are skeptics or atheists, so you'll be fine with them. But there are a few that are theists or theically inclined. That's a word now. Theically. That's, you know what? I'm done now. I don't have any. I mean, usually I say one thing, but I mean, it doesn't make sense to say the thing that I say. So thanks for joining us. Goodbye. Good night.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Reality is confusing. And be sure to subscribe to him and throw money at him or whatever he wants you to do. I don't know what he wants you to do. Do you want money?
Well, it would be nice, but I don't expect you to give it to me.
Okay. So, and then after he talks about the BH whatever the bleep it was.
BGB.
yeah, whatever. Then we're going to talk about the hentai collection that he totally has under the bed. Okay, good. He's like, "Oh, damn you."
Rumbled.
Yeah, okay. I've been stupid. Okay, thanks again. No,
thanks very much.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna hit the button now. You don't have to go, but I'm gonna hit the button for everyone else is gonna vanish. But we're gonna stay here, and then we'll vanish. Okay, goodbye, everybody. All right, I've hit the button. Say something stupid. All right.
See you later.
That's not stupid. Say something stupid. He can't. He's a scientist. He can't say stupid stuff. I'm hitting the button.